Hello everybody, my name is Kador, and welcome to the 4th album review of deadmau5's For Lack of a Better Name album. I'm going to be reviewing the continuous mix version of this album, just like in Random Album Title, but there's not really too much of a difference between the two versions in this one. The only real difference is that there's this sort of like, I guess it's a melody based on Chopin's Funeral March, and then there's this like weird insane guy talking voice sample that happens at the beginning of More Ghosts and Stuff in the continuous mix version, and that sort of adds more to the mood and makes it sound pretty cool. I'm not sure why I didn't include that in the other one, but yeah, there's nothing really to say about it. I'm not going to give a separate grade for each of them or anything. In this album, he sort of took the general format and style of Random Album Title, but experimented with many new sounds and new sort of formats and way of doing things, and just made a lot of stuff that didn't really sound like anything he'd made before. This album feels more like a just compilation of some tracks that he liked rather than an actual album, but I'll talk about that later. For now, let's just get right into the tracks. First up is FML. This track starts out with a sort of triplet-based acoustic drum roll type thing that sort of builds up, very different from the normal beats that he uses. But then the more electronic bass drum kicks in a few, maybe 30 seconds into the song, and you get this sort of weird like laser pew 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 kind of sound as sort of the synth line. It's not really melodic at all, it just sort of adds texture into the beat. It makes it sound a little intense, but also like there's not too much going on, especially melodically. In fact, the only real melody that the song gets is maybe 2/3 of the way through the song, when there's a breakdown with some sort of chords and stuff in the background, and you get this sort of doo-doo-doo-doo-doo type of melody. That sounds pretty cool, but it just only lasts for a very short amount of time, and then it kind of cuts back into the beat with the sort of laser sound that I mentioned earlier, and it's kind of forgotten about. There is a sort of voice sample vox type thing going ha-ha, oh, ha-ha, throughout it, which sounds kind of out of place in the beat section, considering there's no other melody for it to really complement. But in the actual melodic part, it does sound very good. I kind of wish he had maybe extended the melodic part or kind of integrated it more into the rest of the song, because the song feels a little bit like there's not enough going on to really keep it interesting. It's pretty intense, but I think it could be a little bit more interesting and a little bit better, more fun to listen to. It kind of just seems like it was made for dancing to rather than for listening to for the most part. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a 7 out of 10. Next up is More Ghosts and Stuff, which strangely comes before Ghosts and Stuff. This track starts out with the Chopin's Funeral March slash insane guy talking about whatever and laughing maniacally voice sample thing as an intro. I guess it's called like the hard intro version. It sounds pretty cool and really sets the mood well for the song. And then the actual song cuts in with these sort of organ chords that quickly transition into this crazy kind of scratchy synth melody that goes and it sort of continues that throughout the whole song basically. It sounds pretty cool at first, but it doesn't really progress at all throughout the song. It's made a little bit better if you hear Ghosts and Stuff beforehand, which won't happen if you're hearing the album for the first time because of the way the tracks are arranged. This song does flow nicely into Ghosts and Stuff, but the little segments that are sort of samples of Ghosts and Stuff that are spattered throughout More Ghosts and Stuff don't really carry as much meaning if you don't hear the other song first. But yeah, the melody of this track gets a little bit annoying over time because it just repeats the same, 2 bars or whatever it is, 4 bars of melody over and over again. And the sort of nature of the synth is a little scratchy, so it gets like a little bit grating after a while. It is a pretty cool melody and it's very danceable and pretty fun, but there's just not quite enough progression, and it gets a little bit annoying over time, so I'm gonna have to give this one another 7 out of 10. Next up is, as I mentioned, Ghosts and Stuff. This is definitely one of deadmau5's most popular songs, if not his most popular, mainly because it features the vocals of Rob Swire, who's from the band Pendulum, and I believe Knife Party as well, another EDM group. His vocals are really good, and they add a lot to this song. They're pretty auto-tuned, but it doesn't sound like forced or anything. Without his vocals, the song would definitely sound a lot more kind of bare bones and not as much going on, and he adds a lot of intensity and just a lot of character to the song. But in terms of deadmau5's contribution, you have a lot of these cool like organ sounds that aren't quite typical of dance music, I would say. But they really do work with the beats, and he has these sort of bass wump things here and there. That all works really well to create an intense, danceable, and very fun to listen to as well track. No real complaint about this one. It's deadmau5's most popular song, or one of his most popular songs for a reason. And while I definitely don't think it's his best song, I think it still just barely gets a 10 out of 10. Next is Hi Friend. This is a pretty strange song. It features the vocals of MC Flipside as sort of a rap kind of thing. Although it doesn't really feel too much like a rap. It's kind of just him saying stuff. But I guess it is rap. The track isn't too focused on his vocals though. It's more just kind of focused on the deadmau5 part. And the deadmau5 part is not very interesting in my opinion. It's sort of these weird like slidey synth lines that don't really make up much of a melody. It's just kind of like whoop, whoop, and it kind of just does that as like a build up. There's a few cool sounds throughout, and there's a little bit of a hint of a melody now and then, but overall the song just isn't super satisfying to listen to. It doesn't really make you feel too good when you finish it. It's kind of just meh. The sounds of the synths are just very unfulfilling and empty sounding, I guess, and you just don't really get much out of the song, I feel like. I'm gonna have to give it a 6 out of 10. Next is Bot. Now this track is a very interesting beat that sort of sounds like a bunch of metallic, maybe tin cans or something being clacked against each other. It's pretty cool, and it definitely does evoke the feel of something mechanical, like a robot. And it has this cool, like, kind of vocal sample now and then that just sounds pretty cool, I guess. It doesn't really have a melody until maybe about halfway through, or a third of the way through, something like that, where you get these kind of chords, and you get these sort of tin clanking sound that goes in a type of melodic pattern that is a little bit repetitive, but it sounds pretty cool. The melody on this track is pretty good, but it's a little bit short-lived, and it kind of goes back into the beat section pretty soon after the melody. Although, as I said, the beat is pretty interesting, the melody's okay. It's just, there's nothing really to tie everything together and make it super spectacular tracks, so I'll go with a 7 out of 10. And next is Word Problems. This track is very like minimal techno-y, I guess. It starts off with a very quiet and muffled beat with a bass line that's, you know, very in the background and not really super present. It's just very kind of bare bones, nothing really going on at first. You hear this voice sample that starts pretty quiet and gets louder as it goes on. Every once in a while it says Word Problems. The only thing that really happens in this song that's interesting at all is this sort of scratchy atonal bass line that kind of builds up over a few times over the course of the song. And the last time it builds up, it gets like really loud and spread out, and then it kind of just cuts back into the beat. There's really no melody in the song at all, and there's not too much that goes on. It's like pretty quiet and sort of, as I said, minimal for the most part. It's not a super interesting track to listen to. There's just nothing really good I can say about it other than it not being actually bad and annoying to listen to. It's not really that either, but it's just kind of boring. I'm gonna go with a 5 out of 10. And next up is Soma. This song starts out with a very interesting sort of beat sound section that is pretty similar to Bot in that there's these sort of clanking noises that are arranged in different pitches to form not really a melody, I don't think you can call it that, but just sort of an interesting array of sounds, and you just get these cool little clanking sounds that are kind of fun to listen to, but they don't really progress too much. But when they sort of cut out and get a bit faded away and cut out, you get this really cool piano part that's quite beautiful actually to listen to. And eventually these strings come in, and it sort of goes back and forth between this weird clanking section and the piano string section. The melodic sections are pretty simple, but they, as I said, are really beautiful and really nice to listen to. And I think that's kind of what pulls this song from the brink. It would have been a pretty boring and uninteresting song if it was just that clankety noise throughout the whole thing. But the melodic piano sections really bring it all together, and while I don't know if they work super well with the other part, they're definitely welcome when they come in. And the other part doesn't sound bad, it's just a little boring and nothing really happens during it. The ending to this track is also very cool. Everything starts to get sort of a bit crushed as it fades away and gets all glitchy and really weird and cool. Fantastic ending to this track for sure. I think this song deserves an 8 out of 10. Next is the sort of self-titled track to this album, Lack of a Better Name. I feel like I should like this track more than I do, because I mean, it's just a progressive house track. It has a melody of some sort. It has a lot of different components to it to keep it interesting. But I don't know, the melody is just kind of in this weird key that makes it very not catchy. The only catchy part of it is this sort of high-pitched doo-doo-doo that happens throughout. But yeah, that's really the only part of the song that actually sounds good, in my opinion. There's this kind of annoying beeping that happens throughout a lot of it that really doesn't add much to the song, I don't think. I will say though, it has this sort of orchestral strings breakdown section very similar to Slip from Random Album Title, although this time it just doesn't feel quite as beautiful sounding. It just feels a little bit like a copy of what he did there without really adding much. Although the song does progress a lot throughout and has many different sections, so it's interesting, I guess, in that regard. But I don't know, it's just not that memorable of a track, which is kind of weird because it has like literally the same name as the album. But yeah, this song just isn't that good. I don't know. I'm gonna have to give it a 6 out of 10. And next up is The 16th Hour. This track thankfully is not 16 hours long, but it is the second longest on the album, next to the track following it, which I'll talk about in a minute. This track is sort of a welcome break from the kind of experimental different types of stuff that he's been doing on this album. Not that there's anything wrong with experimenting, but it's just sort of nice to get back to the basics every once in a while, and this is just a straight up progressive house song, a little bit like the ones on Random Album Title, although this one is a little bit less bright and cheerful. I wouldn't say it's dark necessarily, but it's a little bit more intense sounding, I guess. This is a very good track. There's really not much to say about it. It's maybe a little bit too long and not quite enough progression, but there is progression. And yeah, there's just a lot of nice melodic segments in this song, and the melody throughout is just good in general. I'm gonna give this one an 8 out of 10. And finally, we come to the famous last track on this album, Strobe. This song is regarded by many to be the best deadmau5 song ever, and I do not disagree. There have been other songs that have come close to overtaking it, but I don't think anything's ever going to overtake Strobe for me. This track stands out among really all the other ones on this album just because of its ridiculously fantastic melody and just its pure emotion that's just put into this track. It's fantastic. It starts out with this very slow synth section with a piano that sort of comes in later on, and it has a fantastic melody right from the get-go, and it sounds really beautiful after just like a minute of listening to it. This section sort of builds up. There's a bass that kicks in at one point, There's various other sounds that are added to it as it builds up, just to make it sound even better as it goes on, and piano, as I mentioned, gets added as well. And then it sort of fades out and makes a pretty smooth transition into a more sort of short synth note type melodic structure where it just goes and it kind of repeats that for a while. My only criticism of this song, if I could have to pick one, would be that this section of basically two notes going back and forth goes on maybe a little bit too long. Oh, and also that the kick drum that starts in this section is a little bit maybe low quality. It gets better as it goes on, but it starts off just kind of like a sound, which doesn't sound fantastic. But I mean, I'm really picking at the details here. As I said, this is my favorite song ever. Anyway, so this section goes on for a while and sort of builds up and just sounds great as it is. And then it sort of fades out again and makes an even smoother transition into the real fantastic part of the song, where it basically takes the same sort of short little notes but throws them all over the piano roll in this incredibly complex and detailed melodic structure that just sounds freaking fantastic. It's just so cool to listen to, and there's just so many notes going all over the place at the same time. It's like instantly just so beautiful when this kicks in. And to make it even better, this sort of organ sound comes in, sort of fades in the background, and gets louder as it goes on, in this just very unforgettable melody that complements the quick notes that are going on at the same time super, super well. The quality of the organ sound sounds sort of very like distant and nostalgic, and man, this part of the track is just really, really beautiful. And just when you thought it couldn't get any better, it fades out a little bit. This big drum sound happens, and then it comes back in with the beat in full force, and it just sounds amazing. This is the moment of emotional intensity for this song, and I think it's generally considered to be the best beat drop in EDM history, if you want to reduce it to that, but it's just beautiful and fantastic, and this song's so good. From there, it kind of just slows down and just sort of tapers out and gets sort of muffled as it goes along, and you just get these cool little sound effects as it fades out. And it's just a perfect way to end the album. Just the most fantastic example of saving the best for last. This song is truly a masterpiece, and it's amazing how deadmau5 can make someone feel all these emotions just from noises generated from machines and computers. This track is the main reason that I admire deadmau5 as much as I do, and decided to pick him for this whole album review show. At least to start out with. I'll do a bunch of other people later on, but you know. So yeah, those are all the tracks on the album. Now for the album composition as a whole, it wasn't that good, to be honest. It felt more like a collection of various songs that he liked rather than an actual album as a whole that, you know, worked together cohesively. It felt a little bit random and arbitrary how the songs were arranged. Although I did sort of pick out two distinct types of songs that are on this album, and that was the kind of more experimental, beat-focused types of tracks that he was just kind of messing around with different sounds with, and then the more melodic, emotional types of tracks. And I think Soma was actually a very nice combination of both of those kinds of things. So I think the album might have actually worked better if he arranged it in a way where it started with one type of song, and then there's Soma, and then there's the other type for the most part. It would just sort of be these like two sections that were transitioned by Soma. I feel like that would have worked better and probably upped the grade a little bit, but as it is right now, I'm gonna have to give it a 6 out of 10 for album composition. Alright, so with all those scores averaged together, we get the final grade for lack of a better name, to be a 7.3 out of 10. I really wish I could give this album a higher grade than I did, because, you know, it has Strobe on it, and Ghosts and stuff, and a couple others I really like, but the rest of the songs on the album were not super special, and They really just brought the grade down. And also, as I said, the album felt a little bit more like an arbitrary collection of songs that he liked rather than an actual cohesive album as a whole where all the songs flowed together perfectly and worked really well together. It wasn't so much of that. Not to say the mixing was poor, like on the continuous mix version. It was, for the most part, pretty good. But yeah, as far as an album, it just didn't really cut it, in my opinion. I would only recommend listening to this whole album if you are a true deadmau5 fan, or if you just really like, you know, EDM, I guess. Techno, house, you know, that kind of thing. Although I would definitely recommend listening to Strobe, like anybody. If you're not even into electronic music, you should listen to Strobe. It's so good. And yeah, Ghosts and Stuff, and maybe a couple others, but for the most part, this album was a little bit of a letdown, at least compared to Random Album Title. So yeah, that's it for this video. Tune in next time when I talk about the 5th studio album by deadmau5, 4 times 4 equals 12. See ya then.